Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today, my guest is Kent Weishaus. He's had a 25-year career in television production, working on talk shows, game shows, tabloids, sitcoms, and other programming before making a switch in 2006, going back to graduate school and becoming a licensed clinical social worker. Since then, he has worked in mental hospitals, in community clinics, schools, and now he's semi-retired, continuing a part-time private practice. Kent is also the author of Stop Breaking Down: How to Avoid Overwhelm and Crack Up, something we all need, especially these days. Kent, welcome to Self Talk.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So we got a little bit of your background in the intro, but how does someone make a switch from a career in television production to clinical social work? How did you do it?
Yeah, it was a long process. It probably was a decade of processing, cognitive processing. I was working on actually my thoughts in this direction came while I was working on the Arsenio Hall show as associate producer, and whereas I was happy with my work on Arsenio by and large, with our work. It became more and more evident to me that certain television programming, more on the tabloid end, was exploitative. Really, it's designed to sell sponsors products, and so at that time, I think I read a book called "Amusing Ourselves to Death." I can't remember the author's name, but it kind of jangled my brain and said maybe you should be thinking about a different direction. And so my parents were both therapists, so I thought, well, maybe I've gone a long way out of my way to come back a short distance correctly. So in 2006, I went back to grad school and got my MSW, and a couple of years later was licensed as licensed clinical social worker in California, and I haven't really looked back. Although I actually have been called here and there to, like I did a stage managing gig on the Academy of Country Music Awards after I'd gotten my master's. So anyway, now and then things come up.
Yeah. Are there any parallels you see between producing and doing therapeutic work?
Yeah, um, a, a lot of my work as a producer, especially, was peacekeeping, moderating between disagreeing parties. I also worked for a man named Milt Hoffman for a number of years, who he'd been around since radio days producing, and he tended to have a little black and white thinking here and there, and would heat up very quickly. And so I would moderate between him and the rest of the crew. Not a lot, but sometimes. He was also a very knowledgeable and thoughtful guy. I don't want to paint him into a corner that way. So
Yeah. So a lot of moderating.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Talking
And
talking people off the ledge.
right. Well, also, just hiring people. I can remember a few dozen times getting on the phone saying, "Would you come do this special that we're doing?" To a couple dozen different crew members, and invariably you're offering them $1 or two less than they want to be making, and so it's also another reason why I kind of wanted to get away was on specials, especially you are going after a slightly lower rate, and someone is kind of having to take that, and they don't like it, unless it's somebody you absolutely want. You're probably not going to pay the full rate, and oh, just do this for me this time, and next time it'll be the real rate, and it's just duplicitous. It wasn't really, it didn't feel that good.
Yeah, yeah. So as you moved into clinical social work, What are some themes that you saw coming up with the people that you worked with? What were some of the issues that you saw your clients coming to you to work on?
The, sorry, my phone is making noise here, and I have to turn it off. Yeah, my clients initially, I was working with mainly kids. And well, no, that's not entirely true. I was with kids in a certain clinic in South LA while I was interning, and accumulating hours for licensure. And I also was, so that's one population. And another population was psychiatric hospitals, as you mentioned in my intro. I worked at two of those, and so very different, obviously, but the themes, you know, then and now, there's a big overviewing theme of how do we cope in a society that is designed in many ways to make us dysfunctional. That we've got income disparity, great wealth disparity. How do we cope with that? And so I was also a adjunct professor at Cal State LA for 4 or 5 years after I got my license, and I would tell my clients, my students, um, be aware that you will many times be uh, where the rubber meets the road of bad policy. And so like, how are you going to help people cope while you're there to gently enforce a policy which is designed in many ways to marginalize and keep people in struggling.
Mm. Yeah. How does one do that?
Well, um, you know, it's not that you're aware of it in the moment while you're working with people, as you know, as a therapist, you join them, hopefully. You join them where they're at. But I think it's important, and I speak about this a lot in my book, it's important to keep in mind the many systems around us that are that we're involved in, that we're embedded in, that we don't even see that we're in, and systems that, as we said earlier, the idea, as you mentioned earlier to me before we got on, the societal beliefs that affect individual beliefs. We have uh, great umbrellas of ideas raining down on us, and narratives raining down on us that we internalize. And it's very easy to come to feel either that I'm less than, that because I'm struggling with functioning, I'm marginalized, because I've been given a label of a diagnostic label. I am that label, you know. Um, and so I gently try and point out the systems. You know, I get that that label may be useful in certain ways, but also maybe these are things you're struggling with right now,
Mm.
but tomorrow you may not be. Tomorrow you may be moving on to something completely different and in a higher functioning way. Um, and so yeah, I also feel that we as clinicians get trapped into the narratives that come along with the diagnostic labels. And, you know, it's nice to talk about clusters of symptoms that you see in groups of people that share a commonality. Um, but it's easy to fall into the trap, especially in psychiatric hospitals. Oh, you know, the psychotic in the game room down there. You know, it's like colleagues putting a label. You know, the depressive and such down the hall. It's just not useful. I think it's more counterproductive than productive. I don't know. Did I get off on a tangent there?
No, perfect. In fact, this was where I was heading. So we have these societal expectations or rules, if you will, societal norms that may or may not be beneficial to us as individuals as we move along our psycho-spiritual path, and of awareness and of self-awareness and awareness of the world around us. And what you said, and I want to circle back to this because my clients are going to go, uh-oh, this is her thing, is one of the reasons I don't take insurance is because I don't want to have to diagnose someone for the
Right,
very reason you just mentioned.
right.
It is, we have enough labels and roles that are foisted upon us from the moment we're born.
Absolutely right.
So, and then it's almost like I think of an armadillo, right? Like all these little layers and, of things that stop us from being our true nature.
Right,
And
right.
in order to get, and this is Jung's individuation, in order to get along in the world, we have to start like questioning those scales, that are there. And that's a really long and sometimes difficult process. And it doesn't help if you've been told, I'm bipolar.
That's right. That's
That's
right.
who I am.
If you're embedded in these systems that rain beliefs down on you, you internalize many of them, and yes, it does not help. The idea of thinking about your thinking, and Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel-winning psychologist, talks about system one and system two thinking. System one thinking being very quick, mammalian, danger or not thinking. System two being literally thinking about thinking. And he has kind of an acronym. What you see is what there is, and what there is being the operative word. It's like, will always be this way. What I'm seeing right now we tend to be grounded in the here and now. So it's really important to remind yourself, no, this is happening right now, but an hour from now, it's going to be very different. And so think about your thinking, think about the systems you're embedded in, think about what others' beliefs are, how they're affecting you, how they're raining down on you. I also, in my book, talk a lot about just the historical, the developmental, the evolutionary nature of our behaviors. It's only we're living in a culture, where we're expected to keep up with rapid fire social media narratives that are just bombarding us. Not to mention, if you live in an urban area, you're surrounded by cars going by at 60 miles an hour, and a lot of them, and helicopters and noise, and perhaps because of our social systems, people who are not grounded in the same reality as we are on the corner talking to someone who's not there. And so we are expected to process this stuff. And if you think about it, really, it's just been the last 5 or so generations that this has been building up, because 150 years ago, the awful uh, images that we see on our phones just by flipping through were extremely rare. You just didn't see those things unless you were in a war zone, or were the extreme outlier victim of crime. And so it's important that when we see these images on our phone and we feel this is here now and always to be here and right next door. No, it's across the planet, and it's perfectly valid to be concerned about it, but also understand that your mammalian systems of alarm and danger are being triggered by this, and they never were to this extent 5 generations ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't know if you have an answer to this, but let's throw it around. Why? Why now? Why are we being bombarded with all of this fear? And it's what
Well,
it is. It's generating the fight or flight, and we're constantly, even the weather, right? You
Yeah.
and I were just talking about the weather.
That's right.
Everything is the storm of the century. Everything is clear out the shelves from the grocery store because this is it, folks.
Right, right.
Everything's freaking apocalyptic. Why?
Yeah, no, because it sells more of the sponsor's product. Having been in that
That's
business,
true.
I can tell you. You're absolutely right. I pick up the newspaper and it says a new atmospheric river is coming in, over the Bay
Solar
Area.
flares.
Right. And it's like, whatever happened to a thunderstorm's coming in, it's like everything is a doomsday scenario. Right. And having worked, the end of my TV career was largely in tabloid or at least exploitative programming. And I can tell you that that style has now permeated. That was the late 90s, the late 90s. That style has now permeated most of media, and including a lot of what I would call progressive media latch onto it as well. The idea that, and certainly conservative reactionary media is beating the drum on it. The idea that this awful thing is happening right now and it's always going to be happening to you. Um, uh, so in television, you sell more of the sponsor's products by doing it if you're a tabloid show, and now it's permeated, as I said, mainstream news and so on. Why you asked why? I think that's largely the reason, and also the algorithms on our social media tend to bring this stuff up. It's like I think they're indirectly selling the sponsors products, which is probably just buy more of our website. Or our app. So yeah, unfortunately, and also, there is that part of us that when we see an accident on the expressway, the freeway, we slow down and look at it. You know, oh, I have to look at that. And it's like, but if that wasn't in front of you every 30 seconds with the flip of your phone, I suspect our lives would be a lot more balanced. And I also think that the media, social media, et cetera, as we said, as well as urban stimuli, is responsible for the increasing numbers of people struggling with clusters of symptoms that we call depression, anxiety, even psychosis, ADHD. There's an overall traumatic effect of this overwhelm that no one's talking about.
Yeah, yeah, very, very few people. I think they're only just starting to talk about it. And we're also starting to talk about intergenerational trauma, collective trauma. Thomas Hubel is doing a lot of work with collective trauma now. So let's talk about that for a second. These societal beliefs, or where we are, what's being fed to us from the media, and even just conversations in one's community, which are,
Sure.
of course, still, our global community is getting smaller and smaller, as you mentioned. Like, we may see on our phone atrocities that are happening thousands of miles away. We still feel it because we're human,
That's
right?
right.
We're not supposed to not feel it. But how these societal beliefs, and let's just lean into that. Let's keep y'all in a state of fear so that we can control you. How that affects individual consciousness, but also collective consciousness. What are we looking at, Kent?
Collective consciousness. Good idea. Good thought. Well, I think it's important to find ways to soothe your own activated or wounded parts, to pull pull away. I'm not saying drop out. I'm saying spend time away from it. Um, Doing things that are soothing to you, that remind you that you're a valid individual who does deserve to be able to uh, take time to, uh, be meditative, spiritual, uh, study things that are important to you that are not awful, horrific things. I don't know. Am I answering your question?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Um, there's lots of different things that people can do. As you said, you don't take insurance, which I admire. The Because insurance and many psychological organizations, at least government ones, tend to subscribe to a cookie cutter form of intervention. We have this intervention, which has been statistically proven to be more valid than these other ones, and so you must use it.
Yes.
And so what happens then when you don't trust the abilities of the clinician to make a clinical decision as to what's best for the client? What happens then is you figure out ways to get around that. Okay, well, I've got to use this paradigm. How can I use it and work around it and still treat this person successfully? So I'm off on a tangent here, but the reason I'm saying this is one of the things you can do is seek out counseling help from people like you and me. But there are lots of other things you can do to help yourself regain functioning, even just a little bit. Whether it's a meditative practice, whether it's running, tai chi, yoga. Um, some people like to drag race. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, other than because it's going to generate the same kind of fear within you that the media would. But I could see maybe for the outlying person here that might be their thing, or bungee jumping or something like that. Um, Ways to separate yourself from the overarching cultural umbrella raining these ideas down on us.
Ah, beautifully said.
Hiking, other things, things like that. So design, try, try and figure out ways to get distance from it, and then to introspect, to figure out ways. What am I? I personally, I love meditation because the idea of focusing on my five senses one at a time, along with visceral feelings, or one practice I like and I prescribe sometimes for clients is because thoughts are always interjecting while we're in meditation. Hey, don't forget to take out the trash. Don't forget to call your brother at 5 o'clock this afternoon. Or a thought of isn't it awful what's happening 5,000 miles away? Visualize the thought. I'll ask my clients to actually take that thought and visualize it in a way that works for you. Frequently, it's a cloud thought bubble. For personally, I like tubes coming out of my head. Oh, there's that thought. um, but there's all kinds of different ways to just the act of visualizing with a label. Call your brother thought. Lets you step back from it. Lets you go, oh yeah, okay, I've got a little distance from that now. Now I can do a little more introspection. And so there's lots of different practices that we can all do, and I'm sure you use them in your interventions the way I do. So so
Yeah,
yeah,
it's really about bringing us back to ourselves, our capital
yes,
S selves, right?
yes, yes,
And so that leads me to the next question, which is, and I can hear, it's like when I do these interviews, I can hear the listeners going, wait, ask this. So the listeners are asking, how can you be socially conscious? How can I care about the troubles in the Middle East with, and how do I care about that while still being in a state of self-preservation and self-soothe like, aren't I supposed to be doing something, right? And that's what this amped up fear thing, right? Everything is apocalyptic, nothing is and then, as you so beautifully pointed out, guess what, folks? This is what contributes to ADHD. This is what contributes to anxiety, anxiety, especially depression.
right.
Anxiety being a physiological state.
That's right. That's right. It's a visceral state. It's your bones, muscles, and guts saying danger, right outside, danger.
Right. So many people think anxiety is here,
Right,
but it is
right,
not. It's
right.
that's the one who gets the message from the body
Yeah,
going,
yeah.
holy crap,
Right,
we're
right,
right. So um and so a lot of what I'm sure you are working with clients, and certainly what I'm working with, the rapid thinking, the fatigue, gosh, so much fatigue, the helplessness, the hopelessness, imposter syndrome, comparison traps, all of these things feed into what I call the lack of a foundation of self, right? The capital S self. So how do we stay socially conscious? How do we bring the grounded self into the collective? Because the we are meant to be working together as in humanity, the collective.
right.
But like I submit to the people I talk to that we have to have we have to be on our own path of self-awareness first, so that we are bringing to the collective something that is not perfect, not fully self-actualized, because good luck, I hope you get there. Well, we're all trying, but that we're doing this inner work, that we're not spiritually bypassing, that we're not looking at our trauma, that we're sitting with it, but we're not living it either. We're not living our diagnosis. We're not labeling ourselves, putting more pressure on ourselves. It's exhausting, right? You
Right.
have the weight of the world and the weight of the self on you,
Your
right? So,
your words were not spiritually bypassing. I really like that. Uh, so I, I again going back to the systems around us, and I'm talking about historical systems. Yeah, we tend to go, mammalian thinking tends to be danger, yes, nurturance, yes. Which one do I turn to? As opposed to the huge gray spectrum in between. Might be a little dangerous, but I could go towards that. Um, uh, so, so the idea of not what it what the bombardment does is it generates black and white thinking. I have to be active right now. I have to go out and do this. But in fact, studying the history of the systems, the, the history, nuanced history of the systems around us is really, really important, because that's another way, in my opinion, an important way to be able to step back and say, yeah, this bad stuff is happening, whether it's wealth disparity, Middle East, homelessness. This bad stuff is happening, um, and I have to do something. It may be much more advisable to study it first. Where did homelessness come from? In my opinion, it comes from wealth disparity. And there's a thousand systems that played into that, or 100 anyway. And so come to understand those systems before having a black and white, response to, I know the answer and this is it, type thing. Just as a little digression here, you were talking about the authentic self. I'm a big fan of Richard Schwartz's internal family systems approach. The idea that parts of us are activated when we experience different social media stimuli or different urban environment stimuli. Parts of us are activated trying to get to know those parts, and not to shut them down, to listen to them. Thank you for advising me. Thank you for trying to protect me. But I think I've got this. One of my favorite questions that Schwartz suggests is, how old do you think I am? Because frequently the wounded part is going to say, "Oh, you're 5. You're 5 years old. You haven't got a clue as to how to handle this." And so So getting to know your parts that are activated by these narratives, by the stimuli, um, is really important. Now, Schwartz has written a great book called No Bad Parts, which is a good way to start. But therapists, many of us therapists also have an approach that uses that, or Jungian, or voice dialogue. They're all valid um, to get activated wounded parts talking to the self, listening to them. The self ultimately, as I think we might agree, it knows what we need if we can get the activated parts away from the driver's seat. The self can the self can begin to say, okay, I hear your concerns, but it might be safer to do it this way. Um, uh, and so and approaching our internal parts this way, I think, is actually very important. That the idea that we are a single entity is fallacious. We're made up of a lot of parts with a self, with a governing self in there, but the self is frequently taken over by wounded parts. Um, so so yeah, it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and so that's the work. What I want to repeat uh something you said that I think is so helpful, that in the direct answer to how do I do both? How do I be socially conscious and do my inner self work? I loved what you said, do some research. Don't go into full battle mode, right? Like, right,
Right.
rushing the battle. I know, and like you said, I know what the answer is. This is how we do it. Instead, yeah, that is how you learn. That is, and as you're learning about wealth disparity, as you're learning about racism in America, for example, um, letting those parts sit with you at the table and learn too, right? Listen to what comes up for you,
Right.
you
Right.
know, whether no matter what color or gender you are, this is this is important. Listen to what comes up. Have that dialogue with yourself and your
Yes.
your existing beliefs that does this serve me anymore?
Right. Right.
Is
And
this society? Yeah, go ahead.
something you mentioned earlier, multi-generational trauma, because we're going to have wounded parts from traumas that our parents and grandparents and great grandparents experienced,
Right.
and they're going to advise us, those parts. They're going to tell us, possibly in a fight or flight way, what to do.
Mhm.
And it's fine. Talk to them. Don't shame them. Don't push them away. Talk to them. Let them advise you. But ultimately, seek out um, a well-researched, well-balanced approach as you take their advice or
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
Right?
Well, right. And that's checking. And then this is again somatic work. Check with the body. How do you feel when you're presented with a certain piece of information? Are you
Yeah,
going into fight or flight, or are you in, you know, in a relaxing state or an open, I call it an open state. Oh, all
sure,
right, more. Let me give, then we'll go in that direction. Beautiful. I could talk about this for hours, but we do have to close for this session. I
sure,
hope you'll come back because this is such a wonderful conversation to have.
sure.
Um,
I'd be honored. I'd love to come back and talk to you some
yeah.
more, Rachel.
So how can people find you, Kent?
Easiest way is my website, kentw.net. Kentw.net is a little stuff about my background, but more importantly, my book, Stop Breaking Down: The Secret to Avoiding Overwhelming Crackup, um, which talks a lot about the things we have spent time today talking about, as well as other systemic approaches to coping and healing from the onslaught that we're all under experiencing right now.
Beautiful. And I will have those links in the show notes. There, I think you're also on LinkedIn. I think you sent me that link as well. So I'll put all
Oh,
that
right.
in. I'll put that in the show notes. Kent Weishaus, thank you so much for being with us on Self Talk today.
Thank you, Rachel.